The glass doors of Atlas International slid open with a smooth sigh, letting in a tide of travelers dressed in polished shoes and quiet confidence. Every step echoed against the marble floor, blending with the steady roll of suitcases and the faint hiss of espresso machines nearby. It was another morning of departures and arrivals, the kind that spoke of business deals, board meetings, and people who never waited in line. Among them walked Dr. Elias Grant. Tall, reserved, every movement deliberate. His dark, tailored suit fit like it belonged in a boardroom, yet his expression carried the calm of someone used to being underestimated. He wasn't here for the attention. He was here for a flight, a short connection before a meeting that would shape the future of his company. As he approached the VIP lounge, the gold access card glimmered briefly in his hand. It was a small symbol of status, though to him, it meant little. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had designed this very terminal. His company, Grant Infrastructure Systems, had laid its foundations, drafted its curves, and coded the security systems that welcomed passengers from around the world. He had poured his vision into every beam and corridor. Yet the irony was about to show him just how invisible a man could be, even in a place built by his own hands. The hostess behind the lounge counter smiled, though it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, sir. May I see your invitation?" He presented it wordlessly. Her gaze flicked over the card, then up at him, and lingered, longer than it should have. "One moment, please," she said softly, stepping aside. Her fingers moved to the phone. A quiet exchange followed, too hushed to catch, but her tone told a story older than this terminal. The air changed. Passengers filtered past, some glancing briefly before looking away. A man in a navy suit frowned as if wondering why the line had stopped. The staff behind the counter avoided eye contact. When she returned, the hostess smiled again, only tighter this time. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be a small issue with your credentials. Do you mind waiting while we verify?" He didn't argue. Years of experience had taught him that composure unsettled people more than anger ever could. "Take your time," he replied. But inside, something cold stirred. Not rage, not surprise, just that old familiar disappointment. The kind he'd met in hotel lobbies, conference halls, and investor dinners. As minutes stretched, a faint crackle interrupted the murmur of travelers. Two security officers appeared near the lounge entrance, radios clipped to their shoulders. One of them pointed discreetly in his direction. Conversations paused. Heads turned slightly, not in confrontation, but curiosity. The hostess leaned forward and whispered, "It's just a misunderstanding, sir." He said nothing. He already knew how these misunderstandings usually ended. The officer adjusted his badge, voice firm but polite. "Sir, we'll need you to step aside for a moment." The hallway noise seemed to fade as eyes began to follow. His gold card still glinted faintly on the counter, the same card issued to global elites. Yet somehow for him it wasn't enough. And just as he rose from his seat, the radio on the officer's shoulder hissed again. A voice on the other end saying something that made both men glance at each other. Whatever this was, it was about to escalate. If stories like this matter to you, take a second to support the channel. Like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next in that lounge would silence every whisper in the terminal. The supervisor arrived within minutes, a man in his late 40s with a perfectly knotted tie and the kind of composure that spoke of endless customer service training. His tone was smooth, his posture confident, and yet there was that undertone, the practiced civility that often preceded humiliation. "Good morning, sir," he began, glancing briefly at the gold card on the counter before meeting Elias's eyes. "This lounge is for verified VIP members only. I'm afraid your credentials aren't appearing in our system." Elias met his gaze calmly. "They were verified at check-in. Would you like to see my passport, my digital access code, or perhaps the membership confirmation sent directly from your airline?" The supervisor smiled, tight, professional, but hollow. "That won't be necessary right now. We're just trying to ensure everything checks out." Behind Elias, two white businessmen strolled past without pause. Their cards flashed for barely a second before the hostess waved them through with a cheerful, "Welcome back, Mr. Davenport." The contrast didn't need explaining. It was obvious. Elias noticed the way the supervisor's eyes flicked toward his wristwatch, as though measuring patience against discomfort. Around them, the lounge's hum continued. Gentle laughter, clinking cups, whispered calls about quarterly earnings. But a subtle shift was happening. A few heads turned, pretending not to watch. A woman lowered her magazine just enough to peek over the edge. Another man angled his phone discreetly toward the commotion, pretending to scroll. "Sir," the supervisor continued, his tone now firmer, "if you could just wait over there, we'll sort this out quickly." Elias didn't move. "May I ask what the issue is exactly?" "It's just that your credentials aren't matching our records." "Did you check them properly?" His question wasn't hostile, merely factual. The man's smile thinned further. "Of course, but these systems are automated. Sometimes they flag inconsistencies." Elias tilted his head slightly. "Automated systems I helped design." The words hung between them, calm, sharp, unyielding. For a brief second, the supervisor's confidence faltered. "I'm sorry?" I said, "The access verification system you're using was developed by my company, Grant Infrastructure Systems. We built this terminal's internal architecture, including your database integration." The man's polite mask slipped only for a heartbeat before returning. "I see," he said quickly, feigning comprehension he didn't feel. "Well, I'll double-check." He turned toward the counter, muttering to the hostess, who avoided eye contact altogether. Her voice trembled slightly as she replied, "It's still showing unverified." Elias could feel the weight of the moment pressing in, the quiet erosion of dignity masked as protocol. It wasn't new. He'd felt it in five-star hotels, in private boardrooms, in charity galas where his presence was mistaken for staff. Yet somehow, each time, it still cut the same way. The supervisor returned, forcing another thin smile. "I appreciate your patience. Would you mind telling me what company you said you represent?" "Grant Infrastructure Systems." He nodded slowly, pretending to type something into a tablet that was already locked. "Right. I'll just, run another verification." Behind the counter, a younger employee whispered something to a colleague, who shrugged. The supervisor's expression hardened. "Security," he called softly into his earpiece. "Please verify a potential impersonation issue at VIP entry." The words dropped like a pin in a silent room. Elias exhaled once, controlled and deliberate. Then he reached into his jacket, withdrew his phone, and tapped the record button. The camera lens blinked red, reflecting off the glass counter. The supervisor shifted uneasily. "Sir, there's no need for that." "There's every need," Elias replied quietly. "You said you're following procedure. So am I." Whispers rose again, sharper this time. A woman near the refreshments whispered, "Why are they calling security on him?" Another man muttered, "He's got a gold pass. What's the problem?" The problem stood in plain sight, draped in politeness and procedure. As Elias stood still, the hum of the terminal seemed to fade until only the ticking of the wall clock remained. Every second he spent explaining himself in the building he'd construct, architecture turned into a cage of his own making. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He just watched, documenting the performance that unfolded. Calm, steady, and heartbreakingly familiar. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, the kind that carried authority and certainty. Security had arrived. Before the headlines, before the gold membership cards and Forbes interviews, there was a boy who spent his afternoons on the east side of Detroit, sitting cross-legged on cracked pavement, sketching bridges on the backs of cereal boxes. His name was Elias Grant, and his hands were always stained with graphite. The neighborhood around him echoed with sirens and worn-out laughter, a place where dreams were things you whispered, not announced. His mother, Angela, cleaned offices at the nearby airport. The same airport where businessmen brushed past her without a glance, where security guards double-checked her ID every single shift. Elias used to wait for her outside those terminals, pressing his face against the glass to watch planes rise into the clouds. He didn't see the distance. He saw connection. "One day," he told her, "I'll build something that touches the sky." She'd smile, hand him her lunchbox, and say, "Then make sure everyone gets to walk through it." That promise stayed with him. When other kids collected baseball cards, Elias collected scraps, old circuit boards, broken toy motors, pieces of cardboard. He built miniature bridges out of discarded wood, balanced them on bricks, then tested their strength with stones. At 14, he entered a citywide science fair with a model of an energy-efficient terminal gate system made entirely from bottle caps and glue. He didn't win. The judges said it was too advanced for his level. He went home, smiled at his mother, and said quietly, "That means I'm ahead." Years passed, and his sketches grew into blueprints. Scholarships opened doors, though each one came with the same quiet challenge, to prove he belonged. At the University of Michigan, he was often the only black student in his engineering lectures. He remembered professors mispronouncing his name or assuming he was part of the maintenance staff. He never argued, he built. His thesis focused on inclusive infrastructure, public spaces designed not just for efficiency, but for equality. Airports, he argued, should be places where access reflects merit, not appearance. The idea caught attention, not for its novelty, but for its courage. It questioned a system that preferred comfort over fairness. After graduation, he took a small loan and started Grant Infrastructure Systems, GIS, from a one-room office with 2 used computers and a second-hand printer. The company's goal wasn't just to build, it was to employ. GIS became known for contracting minority engineers, training underrepresented youth, and guaranteeing equal pay across all roles. Within a decade, GIS was managing multi-billion-dollar projects. Its blueprints redefined airports, train stations, and smart cities across the world. Elias became the man cities called when they needed vision and accountability in the same sentence. But he never forgot where he came from. When GIS secured the contract to rebuild Atlas International Terminal, he made a point of hiring dozens of local workers, including single mothers like his own and students from communities like the one that raised him. Every polished tile in that terminal was meant to mean something. Each automated door, each security algorithm, each piece of technology was designed to eliminate bias, to create a system where people mattered more than assumptions. That was the irony cutting deepest now. Because standing in that same terminal, the one he had designed to be free of prejudice, he was being treated like an intruder. He thought briefly of his mother. She had passed 5 years earlier, just before the project was completed. At her funeral, he had promised to keep building in her honor, to make sure no one ever had to show extra proof of belonging. Yet, here he was, standing before a hostess with a clipboard who refused to believe that his access card was real. He could hear his mother's voice as clearly as if she were beside him. "You don't need to fight every battle, Eli. Just make sure your silence means something." So he stood there, not defeated, not angry, just watching, documenting. Every small act of condescension became data in his mind, another point of failure in a system still blind to its own prejudice. He had built this place so that every traveler would be greeted with dignity. But dignity, he realized, was still a luxury reserved for a few. The supervisor's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sir, we're still waiting for confirmation from headquarters. It might take a while." Elias nodded once quietly. "I'm not in a hurry," he said. But his tone carried weight, calm, unwavering, and heavy with unspoken truth. He glanced at the architecture around him, the ceiling beams, the glass curvature, the seamless symmetry of the lobby. His creation, his legacy. And now, the very structure that bore his name was watching him be questioned inside it. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was already doing what blueprints couldn't, exposing the cracks in a system that thought it was flawless. The tension in the lounge had thickened to the point where even whispers carried weight. The low hum of conversation had turned into a chorus of cautious murmurs. Every move Elias made seemed to attract another stare. Not of curiosity, but of quiet judgment. Behind the counter, the supervisor whispered into his earpiece again. 2 uniformed guards appeared at the glass door, their radios blinking red, their expressions unreadable. The taller one stepped forward. "Sir, we've been asked to escort you outside for verification." Elias didn't move. His phone was still recording from the countertop, the small red light blinking steadily, silent witness to everything. "I have shown every valid document you requested," he said evenly. "You have no right to remove me from a lounge I'm authorized to use." The supervisor cleared his throat, forcing a brittle smile. "We're just following procedure." "Whose procedure?" Elias asked quietly. "The written one, or the one you improvise when someone like me shows up?" The line landed hard. The supervisor's smile froze, while one of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Then from the corner came a chuckle. A white businessman in a pale gray blazer leaned back in his seat and muttered just loud enough to be heard. Maybe he snuck in. His companion laughed under his breath. The sound sliced through the silence sharper than any insult could. At that moment, a young Latina employee, barely in her 20s, hesitated behind the counter, her phone trembling slightly in her hand. She pressed record. Something in her eyes said she'd seen enough of this kind of thing before. The supervisor noticed her and frowned. "Put that phone away," he snapped under his breath. But it was too late. Others had already started. A woman at a nearby table angled her camera toward the standoff, pretending to adjust her bag. A teenager waiting with her father whispered, "He's recording too." Elias remained still, hands visible, posture calm. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. The taller guard nodded toward his colleague. "Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder for whom?" Elias replied. His voice was steady, unshaken. "I paid for my access, just like everyone else. I will not leave until you can show me a written reason to." The guard hesitated, just enough for everyone watching to notice. That hesitation meant doubt, and doubt meant vulnerability. The supervisor's composure cracked. "If you won't cooperate, we'll have to involve airport security." "You already have," Elias said. "And now they're standing right here, proving my point." The supervisor's face flushed. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Around them, the quiet buzz of the lounge had turned into something else entirely. A spectacle. When the taller guard stepped closer, his hand brushed against Elias's sleeve. Elias's tone sharpened for the first time. "Don't lay hands on me." The words weren't loud, but they struck like thunder. The guard froze. Cameras clicked. Dozens of phones lifted simultaneously, like a synchronized protest. The young Latina employee's voice trembled as she whispered into her camera, "They're trying to remove a man who literally has the gold card." A ripple of voices followed. "This doesn't look right. Why are they targeting him? Someone call the manager." The supervisor's jaw tightened. "Sir, you're causing a disruption." Elias's eyes met his, cold, calm, and impossibly steady. "I'm not causing it," he said. "You are." He reached for his phone, saving the recording. "This entire interaction," he added softly, "is now documented." That line changed the air completely. People shifted, uneasy. Someone whispered, "Is he a lawyer?" Another said, "He sounds like one." Then came the sound that would mark the beginning of the end. The soft click of the lounge door opening, the guards gesturing for him to step out. Elias stood. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just gathered his things with the same quiet dignity that had carried him from the streets of Detroit to the boardrooms of billion-dollar companies. He walked past the guards, through a crowd that parted but didn't intervene. Phones followed his every step. One passenger muttered, "This is going to be everywhere." And within minutes, it was. The first clip hit social media before Elias even reached the corridor. The caption read, "VIP Lounge, Karen strikes again. Black man removed despite valid credentials." Within an hour, the video had racked up tens of thousands of views. Comments flooded in, some outraged, others defensive. "Why are people still doing this in 2025? He was too calm, that's how you know he's used to it. Privilege on full display." By the time he reached the airport's outer gate, his phone buzzed endlessly with notifications he hadn't seen yet. The world had already decided to watch. Inside the lounge, the Latina employee slipped her phone back into her pocket, eyes wide. The supervisor barked orders, the guards looked uneasy, and whispers filled every corner of the room. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The moment they touched him, the story stopped being local and became a lesson the whole world was about to learn. The corridor outside the VIP lounge felt colder, though nothing about the temperature had changed. Elias stood by a wide glass window overlooking the runway, a view most travelers admired, but for him, it carried irony too heavy to ignore. Those planes gliding past, those seamless jet bridges connecting gate to sky, he had helped design them. His company's name, Grant Infrastructure Systems, was etched on the foundation of the very terminal that now treated him like an intruder. He wasn't in handcuffs, but the message was clear. Stay put. One guard hovered by the door, pretending to check his radio. Another kept watch near the hall, as if proximity itself was a threat. The murmured phrase, "We're waiting for the PR manager," echoed faintly between their earpieces. Elias didn't speak. He'd learned long ago that silence could be louder than any argument. The moment he opened his mouth, they'd twist his tone into aggression, his calm into defiance. So he simply stood there, hands in pockets, eyes fixed on the glass. From this angle he could see the terminal's architecture reflected faintly. The arches, the panels, the very symmetry he had once sketched on napkins between flights. It should have been a sight of pride. Instead, it felt like betrayal. They called security on their own security, he thought. Not the kind that guarded doors, but the kind that guarded values. The irony burned quietly. He pulled out his phone, not to scroll through the growing number of notifications. He already suspected what was happening online, but to send a single message. To Assistant Janelle. Delay the press briefing. Something happened. No further explanation. She'd know the tone behind those words. Minutes stretched into a long, uneasy silence. Travelers passed at a distance, some glancing curiously at the tall man by the window flanked by guards. To them, it probably looked like a routine security check. But Elias knew what it really was, another quiet example of the subtle prejudice that hid behind professionalism. A staff member approached hesitantly. She wore a name tag that read Rebecca, her steps cautious, eyes flicking between Elias and the guards. "Sir," she said softly, "our public relations manager will be here shortly to clarify everything." Elias turned to her, his voice calm. "Clarify what, exactly?" She hesitated. "It's just policy, sir. We have to verify." "Verification is what my company built your systems for," he interrupted gently. "You're using my technology to confirm whether I belong." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She had no answer, just a quiet nod and a step back. The guard by the door shifted uneasily. Elias noticed the movement but said nothing. He could feel the tension rolling off them. Not hatred, just the awkward realization of wrongdoing they didn't yet have the courage to name. Outside, a plane thundered down the runway, its engines roaring like a storm. Elias no longer had to summon. The world was already doing it for him. The glass pane vibrated slightly as it took off, and in its reflection, Elias caught sight of his own face. Calm, still, but exhausted. Not angry, just weary of the pattern. He thought of the countless times he'd been told to wait a moment, to let us double-check, to cooperate. The words changed, but the message never did. It was the same language that made him justify his presence in rooms he built, at tables he paid for, and now, in a terminal that existed because of his vision. He closed his eyes briefly and exhaled. The hum of the airport returned. Boarding calls, rolling luggage, the mechanical voice announcing departures. Life continued, indifferent. The smaller guard, perhaps feeling the weight of the silence, tried to start a conversation. "Sir, I'm sure it's just a mix-up." Elias glanced at him, not unkindly but with the sort of look that made people confront their own discomfort. "It always is," he replied softly. The guard lowered his gaze. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. A woman in a navy blue blazer appeared, walking quickly, phone in hand. The public relations manager. Her face was pale, expression tense. She took one look at Elias, then at the guards, and her pace slowed. Something in her eyes changed, a flicker of realization, maybe fear. "Dr. Grant?" she said, voice trembling slightly. Elias didn't answer immediately. He turned back toward the window, watching another plane rise into the sky. "Yes," he said finally. "That's me." Her throat tightened. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding." He looked over his shoulder, expression steady. "That's what they always call it." The guards shifted again. The PR manager swallowed hard. The hallway was quiet now, but not peaceful. It was the silence before everything broke loose. The calm before the corporate storm that was already gathering beyond those glass walls. The sound of tires screeching to a halt outside broke the fragile quiet. Two black SUVs rolled up to the private terminal entrance, their doors opening in swift succession. The air shifted. Authority had arrived. Out stepped the airport director, the airline's CEO, and two members of the company's public relations team, all moving with the uneasy urgency of people aware they were already too late. Their faces were drawn tight, their whispers sharp and frantic. Phones buzzed in their hands, notifications flooding in faster than explanations could form. One of the guards standing beside Elias stiffened as the group approached. The director's eyes swept across the scene. The guards, the PR manager's panicked stance, the man standing by the window who hadn't said much, but whose silence now commanded the entire corridor. The PR manager rushed forward, words tumbling from her mouth. "Sir, there's been a mistake, a serious miscommunication. Dr. Grant, please, allow us to." The airport director froze mid-step. "Wait," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did she just say Dr. Grant?" The airline CEO's expression drained of color. "Elias Grant?" he asked, incredulous. "The Elias Grant?" The guards exchanged looks, confusion melting into dawning horror. The taller one, the same who had touched Elias's arm earlier, took a half-step back, as though distance could erase what had just unfolded. Elias turned slowly from the window, phone still in hand, the sunlight outlining his calm features. His tone was quiet, the kind that didn't need to rise to command attention. "Yes," he said evenly, "that would be me." The corridor fell into a silence so complete that even the distant hum of engines outside seemed to fade. Every eye fixed on him, every heartbeat seemed to pause. The director cleared his throat, voice trembling. "Dr. Grant, we had no idea." "I'm aware," Elias replied. "That's the problem." The CEO took a cautious step forward, adjusting his tie, attempting to recover the professionalism his position demanded. "Sir, please understand, this situation is deeply regrettable. We pride ourselves on diversity and inclusion." "What happened here?" Elias raised a hand slightly, cutting him off without raising his voice. "Stop." The single word froze the man mid-sentence. "Don't insult me with a speech," Elias continued. "You don't need to explain what happened. You just need to ask why it keeps happening." The CEO's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The PR manager looked at the ground, cheeks flushed red. Elias took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Do you know what's ironic, Mr. CEO?" he asked quietly. "My company built this terminal. Every security gate, every data hub, every piece of access technology you rely on, my team designed it." He paused, eyes sweeping across the room. "The systems you use to question my credentials were written by me." The weight of those words landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the group. The director swallowed hard. "Sir, if we had known—" "That's exactly the issue," Elias interrupted gently. "It only matters once you know. Until then, I'm just another man who doesn't fit your idea of belonging." The PR manager's phone buzzed again, another viral repost. The headline now read, "Man removed from VIP lounge, turns out he built the airport." Outside, a cameraman had arrived. Through the glass, flashes popped like lightning. The story had already escaped their control. Elias exhaled softly, glancing once more toward the runway. "You don't need to worry about my membership status anymore," he said. "After today, I'll be reevaluating every contract your airline has with my company." The CEO paled further. "Dr. Grant, please, there must be a way to resolve this." "There is," Elias replied. "You resolve it by changing the system, not by apologizing after you're caught." For a moment, no one spoke. The guards lowered their eyes. The PR manager wiped her forehead. The director stood motionless, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. Then Elias stepped closer to the center of the hall, phone still recording, his voice lowering to something that sounded almost like mercy, but carried the weight of judgment. "Racism never expects receipts," he said softly, "but I always keep mine." And as he walked past them, silence followed, the kind that doesn't come from respect, but from the collapse of every illusion they'd built about who mattered and who didn't. Behind him, the flash of cameras continued, documenting not just a scandal, but a reckoning. By noon, the story had escaped the terminal. It was on every screen, every feed, every trending list. The clip of Dr. Elias Grant standing calmly as two guards escorted him out of the lounge had become a global symbol, not just of humiliation, but of exposure. The caption beneath it read, "He built the terminal they kicked him out of." Inside the airport's executive conference room, the tension was unbearable. Reporters lined the glass hallway, cameras flashing through every opening they could find. The airline's CEO, flanked by public relations officers and legal counsel, prepared to issue what they called a formal apology. When Elias entered, the room fell silent. The same people who had once treated him like an unverified name on a screen now stood, nervously straightening ties and clearing throats. The CEO gestured toward a chair at the head of the table. Dr. Grant, we deeply regret the unfortunate misunderstanding earlier today. Elias didn't sit. His voice was calm but cold, the kind that silences a room more effectively than shouting ever could. You don't regret what happened, he said. You regret that people saw it. The CEO's hand froze mid-gesture. We take full responsibility for the actions of our employees. This does not reflect the values of our company. Elias's gaze held steady. Your values are the actions you take when no one's recording. Your employees didn't improvise. They mirrored what this company rewards: comfort for some, suspicion for others. A quiet gasp came from one of the PR aides, who quickly looked down at her tablet. The CEO forced a stiff smile, struggling to keep composure under the weight of cameras. Dr. Grant, please, we are sincerely sorry. The staff involved have been placed on immediate suspension, pending investigation. Elias nodded once. And what happens after the investigation? The man hesitated. Appropriate disciplinary measures will be taken. Appropriate? Elias repeated, voice steady but razor-sharp. That word usually means just enough to quiet the outrage. I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in policies. What's going to stop the next version of me from standing at another counter, treated like he doesn't belong? The CEO glanced nervously at the reporters, trying to regain control of the narrative. We're already revising our internal procedures and retraining staff. Start with hiring practices, Elias interrupted. Start with leadership that looks like the passengers you serve. For a brief moment, even the clicking cameras seemed to stop. Elias finally sat, folding his hands neatly on the table. His tone softened, but his words carried the same precision. I didn't come here to destroy your company, but understand this. I built systems meant to ensure fairness, and today those systems failed under your watch. That's not a technical error. That's a cultural one. The CEO nodded shakily. We'll make this right. You won't make it right, Elias said, his voice lowering. You'll make it public. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended. Flashes strobed through the glass as one shouted, Dr. Grant, what will happen to the contract between Grant Infrastructure and the airline? Elias paused, turning just slightly toward the crowd. That depends, he said quietly, on whether they rebuild their principles as carefully as I built their walls. By evening, the airline's official Twitter account released a statement. We sincerely apologize to Dr. Elias Grant for the incident at Atlas International. We are reviewing our staff training and inclusivity standards to ensure this never happens again. But the world wasn't buying it. Screens everywhere replayed the moment Elias said, I'm not interested in your apology. I'm interested in your policies. It became the most quoted line of the day. By midnight, the viral clip had crossed 10 million views. News anchors dissected it. Hashtags like Built by Grant and Racism in First Class flooded every platform. Commentators called it the corporate reckoning of the year. And somewhere above the noise, Elias sat quietly in his hotel suite, watching the coverage in silence. His expression held no triumph. Only the steady calm of a man who'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't something people gave. It was something you carried, even when the world tried to take it away. By the next morning, the story had become a storm that no one could control. News anchors spoke over one another on split screens, hashtags flooded timelines, and debates filled every space from breakfast shows to boardrooms. The footage of Dr. Elias Grant standing calmly as uniformed guards surrounded him had ignited a conversation far bigger than the terminal itself. Some commentators defended the guards, insisting they were simply following protocol. Others called it what it was, another display of how structural bias hides behind procedure. A well-known TV pundit remarked, if he hadn't been famous, this would have ended without apology, without headlines, and without justice. The clip replayed behind her as she spoke, looping endlessly, his composed expression, the tension in his voice when he said, "Don't lay hands on me." On social media, the debate was ruthless. One side demanded resignations and reforms, the other accused him of playing the race card. Tweets poured in. At the truth spot, how many times will black excellence be mistaken for intrusion? So what? He's rich. Rules apply to everyone. Don't make it about race. Justice for Grant. They removed him from his own creation. You can't get more symbolic than that. Every talk show, every podcast, every panel discussion seemed to have an opinion on who was to blame. Yet the man at the center of it all said nothing. Elias refused every interview request. CNN called, so did BBC, Bloomberg, and The View. He ignored them all. Not out of arrogance, but exhaustion. He'd seen this cycle before. Outrage, apology, amnesia. The world reacted loudly, then forgot quietly. Inside his hotel suite, he sat near the window with the blinds half drawn, city lights flickering below. His assistant, Janelle, entered with a tablet in hand, her expression conflicted. 10 million views, Dr. Grant, she said softly. You're trending everywhere. People want to hear your side. Elias didn't look up. They already did, he said. They just didn't listen the first time. Janelle hesitated. You could set the record straight. You could... He cut her off gently. If I start defending myself, they'll make it about ego. If I stay silent, it stays about principle. Let them argue. She sighed, placing the tablet down. You know, your calm drives them crazy. He smiled faintly. That's because calm doesn't fit their script. They expect outrage, not restraint. Dignity is harder to dismiss. His phone buzzed again. Journalists, brand consultants, even celebrities offering to help manage the narrative. He turned it face down. The truth didn't need management. It needed memory. Across the world, airports began reviewing their bias protocols. A viral petition demanded that Atlas International publicly partner with Grant Infrastructure Systems for inclusivity reform. Others criticized the move as performative. Too little, too late. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to repair its image. Its stock dipped 7% overnight. The CEO appeared in a hastily arranged press conference, promising an internal audit and renewed commitment to fairness. For Elias, the noise felt distant, like static. He'd spent his life building systems to make access equal, only to find himself locked out by the same bias he tried to dismantle. But he also knew this. One moment of humiliation could rewrite decades of complacency. Later that evening, he sat with Janelle in silence. She finally asked, "Do you think they'll change?" He leaned back, eyes on the skyline. Not until it cost them more to stay the same. The answer hung between them, heavy, precise, unflinching. A newscaster's voice played faintly from the television. The incident involving Dr. Elias Grant continues to dominate headlines as conversations about racial bias in corporate systems intensify. Civil rights leaders are calling this a turning point. Janelle looked toward him. You could use this moment to speak, to lead the conversation. Elias shook his head. No, I don't want to lead the noise. I want to fund the silence, the kind that builds things. She frowned slightly. You mean action? He nodded once. Exactly. He stood walking toward the window. The city stretched endlessly before him. The same kind of city that once ignored his mother's labor, that once doubted his right to belong. Some men fight back with fury. Others fight back with progress. The difference is that fury fades, but progress makes arrogance pay interest. Outside, the skyline shimmered under a fading sunset. The world was arguing, but Dr. Elias Grant was already planning something far more permanent. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day refused to fade. What had begun as a routine confrontation in a glass lounge had become a mirror, forcing an entire industry to face its reflection. While executives drafted apologies and committees debated policy revisions, Elias Grant moved quietly in another direction. He didn't want interviews, he didn't want sympathy, he wanted change with proof attached. The settlement offer from the airline arrived discreetly, 7 figures wired with a non-disclosure clause attached. He declined to sign it. Instead, he restructured the payout into a publicly traceable donation. The statement he released was brief. This isn't about compensation, it's about correction. Let's build something better, together. And with that, the Grant Initiative was born. Within weeks, it became a nationwide movement, a program designed to fund anti-bias training and inclusivity infrastructure across major airports and transport hubs. Every participating institution received not just diversity seminars, but also access to AI-driven bias detection tools developed by Grant Infrastructure Systems, the same kind of software the airline had once tried to purchase from him. Elias's idea was simple but revolutionary. If systems could exclude, then systems could also educate. The first pilot program launched quietly at Denver International. Security officers, gate attendants, and corporate staff gathered in workshops built around one principle: empathy as protocol. They studied unconscious bias, practiced equitable service responses, and learned to recognize how subtle assumptions could escalate into systemic harm. For most, it wasn't comfortable. For some, it was transformative. A viral tweet from a participant summed it up. "Never thought a training session would make me cry. But hearing Dr. Grant's story changed how I see every face that steps to my counter." As the initiative spread, major airlines and airports began signing on. News anchors called it the most ambitious equity reform in aviation history. But Elias never sought the spotlight. When reporters finally cornered him at an event in Atlanta, he gave them a single statement: "You can't fix what you won't measure. Racism hides in silence, so I decided to speak through systems instead." Behind the scenes, he redirected every dime of his personal settlement into another dream, a project named the Angela Grant Innovation Hubs, named after his late mother. These community-based STEM labs opened in cities like Detroit, Baltimore, and St. Louis, places where talent too often died in the shadows of neglect. Each lab provided free access to computers, robotics kits, and mentorship programs for minority students. The first facility opened inside a repurposed warehouse, just blocks from the neighborhood where Elias once sketched bridges on cardboard boxes. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small, intimate, and untelevised. Only a handful of children, teachers, and his team attended. When a little girl asked him what inspired him to build it, he smiled gently. "My mother used to clean places that didn't see her," he said. "Now I build places that never forget her." The crowd fell silent, not out of awe, but respect. Within 6 months, the grant initiative had expanded beyond airports. Hospitals, corporate firms, and universities began requesting partnerships. Elias agreed, on one condition: transparency. Every organization had to release quarterly inclusivity audits to the public. He had been humiliated in front of travelers, guards, and strangers who thought silence was safety. But his answer wasn't revenge, it was reconstruction. He rebuilt the very ground that once tried to bury him. As the press labeled him the man who re-engineered accountability, Elias quietly redirected praise toward his team. "It was never about me," he told them. "It's about the system learning to see again." By the end of that year, the grant initiative had trained over 120,000 transportation employees nationwide. Discrimination reports in participating terminals dropped by nearly 40%. But Elias didn't measure success in percentages. He measured it in something smaller: the absence of moments like the one that changed everything. He stood in the same kind of glass corridor that once reflected his humiliation. Only this time, it reflected progress. The man they escorted out had returned, not to reclaim power, but to redistribute it. And for the first time, the system he built finally saw him for what he'd been all along: not a suspect, but the architect. Morning broke over Atlas International with the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm. The terminal gleamed beneath the rising sun, light spilling through its curved glass walls, the same ones that had once framed humiliation. Now, those same walls reflected progress. Travelers moved through automated gates, scanning boarding passes against systems powered by Grant Infrastructure's technology. The irony was no longer bitter, it was poetic. Every swipe of a pass, every seamless verification, carried a silent trace of the man who had turned disgrace into design. There were no headlines now, no cameras, no loud apologies. Just the everyday rhythm of people passing freely through spaces that finally worked the way they should have all along. They removed him from a lounge. He rebuilt the doorway. Somewhere beyond the departure gates, Dr. Elias Grant stood once more beside the same window where it all began. The glass reflected him faintly, older, wiser, unchanged in resolve. Passengers brushed past without recognition, unaware that the man beside them was the architect of their ease. A young security officer, barely out of training, greeted him politely. "Good morning, sir. Welcome back." Elias smiled. "Good morning," he replied, his tone calm but deep with meaning. It wasn't the words that mattered, it was the absence of suspicion behind them. That was victory enough. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like ordinary respect finally arriving where it should have been all along. Elias glanced across the terminal. The lounge that once denied him now open and redesigned, its new entry display carrying a simple inscription in silver letters. Access is a right, not a privilege. He hadn't approved the inscription himself. A junior designer from his team had added it during renovation, saying it felt like something you'd say. He hadn't changed a word. The PR scandal had long faded, but the ripple effect remained. Airports nationwide adopted the Grant Initiative as a case study in reform. What once began as a moment of prejudice had become an industry blueprint for accountability. Elias often refused interviews still, but when asked privately what motivated him to keep building in a world so often blind to his worth, he'd reply, "Because if I stop, they win twice. First by doubting me, then by silencing what I could have changed." He didn't just reclaim dignity, he redefined it, proving that progress doesn't shout, it endures. Outside, a new plane taxied across the tarmac, sunlight glinting off its metallic body, another small testament to the mind that helped build the very foundation beneath it. Then quietly, the poetic justice line lands like the last note in a symphony. Racism doesn't just cost reputations, it costs the illusion of superiority. The frame closes on Elias watching travelers flow effortlessly through his systems, no longer filtered by doubt or stereotype, just people moving, equal and unseen as they should be. His reflection merges with theirs in the glass, the architect and the traveler, the builder and the believer. The narration turns toward the audience, gentle but direct, drawing them into the moral space of the story. If you were Dr. Elias Grant, would you have spoken or stayed silent? Have you ever faced judgment before anyone even asked your name? Should companies lose contracts over discriminatory acts, or should reform be the real punishment? The pause that follows isn't empty, it's contemplative, the kind that lingers long after the video ends. Like and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, because silence should never be the end of any story.